mentoring on demand. These fine folks who are upstream Kubernetes contributors have dedicated the next hour to helping you with your upstream adventure. So whether you're new or current, we're here to help. Whether you're an early contributor or you're just now starting, either way, we're here to help. We get all kinds of questions. And so that brings me to my next thing. Where can you go to ask those questions? That's Slack. If you are not on the Kubernetes Slack channel, I definitely recommend it. Slack.cates.io. The channel is Meet Our Contributors. And you can ask there, or if you'd like to ask anonymously, you can DM me there on Slack. Again, my name is Paris. It's that matches what you see on YouTube right now. And you can also tweet at us, whatever, get it to us. And that brings me to my last item that I need to talk about, which is code of conduct. We do abide by one. That's under the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. The TLDR there is be excellent to each other like we are every day, and everything would be awesome. That includes like Twitter, that includes our Slack space, wherever we're talking. And panelists, this also goes for you. So also feel free to ask each other questions. I'm not sure if you know each other. We're about to find out in the introductions. But you are allowed to be mentored like anyone else, and feel free to ask each other questions. So we have 3 panelists with us today. We also have George from VMware, who's helping us with VJ duties to YouTube. So wave to George, everybody, if you could hear us on YouTube. And then let's go right into intros. Andy, you're first.
Thanks, Paris. I'm Andy Goldstein. I currently work at VMware with George. And some background on me, I've been working on Kubernetes for, I guess, about the past 5 years now. I started when I was at Red Hat. I actually worked on OpenShift 2, which was a version of OpenShift before Kubernetes existed. And then I helped with the core OpenShift team get OpenShift 3 out the door. I worked a lot on the image registry aspect of OpenShift 3. I also wrote kubectl exec attach and port forward. So if you've ever used those, the initial implementations came from me. And after leaving Red Hat in 2017, I went to Heptio, a startup from Joe Abita and Craig McCluskey, 2 of the co-founders of Kubernetes. And I took a little bit of a break from working on Kubernetes itself. And I was the team lead for Arc, which is now Valero, which is the backup and recovery tool that we've been working on for the past couple of years. That's open source. We're trying to build a community around that. Right now, the team lead is Steve Chris, so that's in other people's hands right now. I miss it a little bit, but what I'm currently working on is Cluster API, which is part of SIG cluster lifecycle. And the goal that we have with Cluster API is to try and provide the same sort of declarative style APIs that you're familiar with for pods and deployments and all of the other typical Kubernetes primitives that you're used to. We want to have that same style, but use it to manage your clusters and your machines. So how can I start from basically nothing and end up with 1 or more clusters with as many nodes as you can imagine and have capacity for? So that's what we're working on with Cluster API. And I guess a couple other things. I'm on the East Coast. I'm in Rockville, Maryland, so close to Baltimore for Paris. And I have, I've got a couple kids and a couple cats, and that's about it for right now, I guess.
Awesome. I do live in Oakland now, but Baltimore for 33 years, which is obviously a really long time for anyone. So, all right, y'all in the Google room, who wants to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Paris. My name is David, David Zhu. You can find me on GitHub as DavidZ627 or in some other forums as DYZZ, in case you've seen me around. I've been working on Kubernetes for about 2 years now, mainly within SIG storage. So I joined just when we were getting started with this new plugin framework for Kubernetes storage called Container Storage Interface. And so I helped bring that to the specification to 1.0. And since then, we've been working on kind of bringing container storage interface support to Kubernetes, which we went GA with in 1.13. Since then, we're still adding some features, adding more support for things, really bringing it up to speed. And as far as things that I'm currently working on, I'm focusing most of my efforts on this project called CSI Migration, which we're trying to take all of our, I guess we could call them legacy now, in-tree plugins. That's all the storage plugins like PD, AWS EBS, even things like empty-dir. We're taking all of those in-tree plugins, and we plan to kind of keep the APIs the same, have no end user impact, while shimming all of the implementation, so migrating all of the implementation to their respective CSI drivers. So right now we're kind of in the middle of these two systems, and we're trying to shim everything to the new system with no user disruption. So that's what I'm working on right now. Besides that, pretty much, yeah, I work at Google, if that wasn't clear from before. And this is actually my first job out of college. So I've been here for 2 years, and before that, I was at Carnegie Mellon.
Very cool. East Coast still.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm recognizing a theme here. Chow, don't break it. Go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Chow. I'm at Google with David. I joined, so Kubernetes is also my first job after graduate. I started around 2015 April, so it's my 4-year anniversary with Kubernetes. I have been working on the API machinery stuff since I joined. I think my main contributions includes the garbage collector, the client Go library, and the entire staging repository idea. I don't know if you like it or hate it. Also the admission webhook, and currently I'm focusing on how to safely upgrade, downgrade the Kubernetes clusters. And specifically, I'm working on the storage migrator. It's a controller that's going to make sure your content in SED is up to date, so that it can survive a cluster upgrade or downgrade. You can find me on GitHub with my handler. It's Caesar Xuchao. Yep, that's about me.
Very cool. Thank you both for joining us. Thank you, Andy, too. All right. First question. The individual wants to know, what's the hardest decision that you've made on the project? And why? Why would you consider it hard?
That's a really good question. I gotta think about that one.
Yeah, okay. Well, we can also go back to it. I do, because I have a couple other ones that are queued up here. The other one is just the basic why Kubernetes. There's several other technologies that you can obviously work on. You could work for NASA and build rockets. Like, why Kubernetes?
So I kind of bounced around through several different technologies and products or projects over the past several years. So I spent a lot of time writing Java backend stuff. So Spring, EJBs, running on JBoss. And this was before I worked at Red Hat, as well as after. I also had a lot of experience doing messaging systems with Apache Cupid. And then, and I mean, it was just sort of, when I was consulting, it was whatever the client needed. And so as I got to the point where I decided I don't want to travel so much as a consultant anymore, I started looking at what seemed to be interesting to me in Red Hat's portfolio, and OpenShift 2 at the time was really intriguing, with the ability to just take your source code or bring your source code and let OpenShift worry about everything else. So I want to do a web app. I want a Ruby on Rails app or a PHP or Python app, and here's my source for that web app, and OpenShift just deployed it and ran it for me. And so that was very interesting to me, and I started working on that, which led me into Kubernetes because Red Hat decided to re-platform OpenShift 3 on top of Kubernetes. And so I just sort of naturally landed there. But I also am still here 5 years later, and I believe that Kubernetes is a great choice as a platform for getting all of your containers orchestrated, scheduled, running, making sure that they stay healthy and stay up. And I think I like the platform. I like the way it's constructed. I really love the people. We have a great community here. I've made a lot of great friends over the past several years, both virtually and in person, going to KubeCons. So I'd say that's why I'm sticking with it, is just all of that together.
That's like, ah. All right. What about y'all?
Yeah, I could come at it from a slightly different perspective, like from a personal goals or impact kind of perspective. I guess why I choose Kubernetes as opposed to working on something else is that I've always been kind of drawn to infrastructure, partially because of the reason where I really like the idea that I can make a change or a new feature that maybe saves a developer like 20 minutes or 30 minutes when they're trying to deploy something, or when they're trying to try some config, or save some time for somebody, but multiply that over by the thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that actually use your product, in this case Kubernetes, and you're saving like man hours, man days, person years, with your changes and your efforts. So kind of like the multiplicative effect of the changes that we make to Kubernetes and how they affect the industry as a whole, the tech industry as a whole, and how that in turn will affect kind of the world as a whole. So I find that really interesting.
So for me, yeah, like David, when I was in the graduate school, I want to work on infrastructure. I always like to work on the back end, not the front end. And when I got my Google offer, I need to choose a team. And I think the options I got back then was between an internal Google system called the Borg and the Kubernetes team. So I think they're very similar to each other. And actually, Kubernetes team have a lot of.
You chose well.
Yeah. So I asked my friends in the industry. They say they have already heard about Kubernetes. I think that's still pre the GA of Kubernetes, but Kubernetes is already gathering a lot of attention. And I was thinking, Borg and Kubernetes, they are working on similar problems, and but Kubernetes is open source, so it's cool. Everyone can see your contribution, and Google is willing to pay me to work on open source. Why not? That's an obvious decision for me. So, and I really enjoyed my time at Kubernetes, so I stayed here for 4 years so far.
So what about the question that we skipped? What's the hardest decision that you've made on the project, and why? Andy, I know you have one.
I can't think of anything that
Nothing where you said that where maybe your decision was swayed one way or the other by other people.
I can't really think of anything. I can think of some choices of some things that I would maybe have done differently.
Okay. What about that?
So when we were working on exec and attach and port forward, we chose a protocol called Speedy, SPDY, and it was somewhat of a standard, but not widely supported by a variety of tooling. And it also is a bit problematic if you're trying to go through proxies. So for our end users who are interested in being able to execute commands in containers, in pods, or port forward or attach, there are better protocols that are now available that due to not getting prioritized and not having people to work on it, that just hasn't been addressed yet. So like I wish that we had picked something different that was a bit more widely acceptable across proxies and different technologies like the web browsers and command line clients and different languages if you're trying to do an integration yourself. So that's something I would have done differently, is pick a different protocol for those.
David, what about you?
I can't think of any particular hardest decision. I think we make a lot of decisions every day. I think every contributor does. And, with the impact on the community being so high, like every decision is hard in its own way. But I can't think of any specific case that I'd like to talk about. Chao, do you have anything?
I guess for me, I think back 2 years ago or 1 year ago, I don't remember it. So when we are deciding to whether to push initializer to beta or whether to push the webhook feature to beta, that was a quite hard decision for me because I was largely involved in both features, and they serve more or less similar purposes. I think at first I was very fervent on pushing the initializer feature to to beta, but then we realized after I had invested like 3 months of time in the initializer thing, we realized that there are just too many technical obstacles to overcome, and but because of the sunken investment, it's hard to switch our course in the middle. But after talking to other community members, we do a very careful calculation of the cost and the benefits, and we decided to switch our course to push the webhook feature to beta instead. I think it's a right call. The webhook feature is we're trying to bring it to GA in next quarter, and it's well adopted. So it's a hard decision, but I still think it's a good call.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. Just like having to throw away something that you've worked on for a couple months or a couple weeks, when new information comes up that like maybe we don't need that anymore, that's always a hard choice to make.
Yeah, and it wasn't just you, Chao, working on that. I know Clayton Coleman and lots of other people were involved with initializers too.
Yeah, we are all. I am emotionally already invested in the future.
So how do you not take it personally? Like when this question came up earlier in the last session, when you create something and someone says it's broken, or that it doesn't work for them, or it doesn't work, period. What are some things that you think about in that case? How do you not take it personally?
It's hard, especially if it's code that you've written. So when I was the tech lead for Arc/Valero, it was great to see all the random people coming in and asking questions. And it's humbling because like either they're doing something wrong or you've done something wrong with your code, or you've designed it where it's too difficult for people to use. And so I think you have to recognize that you're going to get feedback and that it's going to vary. and you need to pause and not make not have rash responses or gut responses without really thinking like, hey, this person's not necessarily attacking me and my code. They're just trying to use the tool or whatever it is. And if it's not working, then let's try and figure out what the problem is and fix it. But it's hard. It really is.
Definitely. Anybody have anything to add?
Yeah, I agree. It's hard.
Yeah, I think for me, like I remember reading something somewhere before where that said like you are not your code, and I think thinking about that sometimes helps me a little bit. Like the code is just kind of an artifact of what I was thinking at that current time, and of course, I am as a person and a software developer am growing all the time. Like even code that I wrote 6 months ago, sometimes I will look at it and be like, wow, that's not great, or I would have done this differently. And so it's important to realize that like, although even if your code, there's like some criticism on your code, that's not criticism on you or your abilities. It's just, maybe you didn't write the best thing or the right thing or the needed thing at that moment. And that's totally fine. You can grow and you can improve on it as well.
Y'all are giving me hope. That was so nice. There's hope. There's hope out there.
For me,
yes. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So for me, I don't really feel like being attacked, but I will be very I will be very worried if someone is criticizing my code. I will feel I owe something to the user. I mean, I owe them a fix. But sometimes it's just there's just too many problems, because I have worked on the project for quite a long time. They're quite. I mean, my footprint is quite large, so there are just too many issues I cannot handle. And at that time, I found that the community is very helpful. Many community members are willing to take over the feature you used to own, or many people are just, they're not just submitting issues. People are also willing to look into the problem and help you to debug it. So I think the community is makes me feel we are powerful. I'm not working on this product alone.
This is good. It's giving me the warm and fuzzies. All right. So back to my DMs here. Hold on 1 second. Those were really good responses. All right. So we have a direct message, and they want to know, it's in regards to API machinery specifically. They want to know, like, why is the on-ramp so hard? And why is it so difficult? Like, what are some of the concepts you think that contributors get stuck with that make it difficult?
As someone who's actually on-ramped to API machinery stuff fairly recently, I guess, I think one of the hardest parts for me was discoverability, in that a lot of times when I was writing code, it's hard to find, like, if you don't know what kinds of things API machinery has built that can help you, it's hard to find those things. Like one example for me would be informers, which is like when we have the Kubernetes API, in the code, you can use an informer that's kind of like a local cache of the API objects. And when I first started working with Kubernetes, I just, I wasn't even aware of this concept at all. And so I was writing all of my code hitting the API server directly. And for me, like the discoverability of this informers thing, like it wasn't introduced to me until much later. And that was like the hardest part. I don't know if you have any solutions to that, or if I even answered the question, but.
No, that was perfect actually. But do you have a solution?
I'll leave it to Andy first. Andy.
So if we get it right, then you're either like working with API machinery or you're not. And ideally the people who are working on API machinery are fairly like a small sized group, because it should just it should be out of your way. Like if you're a Kubernetes end user or you're developing in the ecosystem, ideally API machinery should just, be easy to use and you shouldn't have to think about it. But unfortunately, we're not necessarily there. So things like the informers are quite useful for reducing your memory usage if you have a whole bunch of things that are watching pods, for example. But like you said, David, they're, if you don't know it's there, if it's not documented, if there's not a developer's guide, I honestly don't know. I haven't looked at the Kubernetes development documentation in a long time because I've been in the project for a while, so I can't speak to what does or doesn't exist. But like, if there isn't one, then a developer's guide would be a good thing to try and on-ramp people or onboard people. But like all documentation, stuff gets out of date as soon as it's written, so it's hard to maintain that over time.
I remember the way I learned it was that I asked for a review from a more experienced developer, and they very quickly pointed out like, oh, you could use an informer here, and just being open to that idea and like looking into it was the way that I learned about a lot of these concepts. So like having someone experienced review your code as soon as possible is helpful to help unveil kind of these things.
Yeah, I do feel so when I first started on the project, I was always on the API machinery team. But for me, I also learned all these things the hard way. I have to read the source code myself to just understand how this thing works. And my feeling is many times I don't know why things are written in this way. I just have to accept it and develop on top of it. I do agree we should do more work on the documentation. Yeah, I don't know what's the best way to get on ramp on API machinery. Maybe join the Slack channel and asking questions there.
Mm-hmm.
The community is quite active there. Probably you get your answer very soon.
Yeah, and we also have special interest groups that cover a wide variety of topics in the Kubernetes ecosystem, including one for API machinery that meets every other Wednesday, I think. So in addition to the Slack channel, there's a Google group for API machinery. There's also the public community meetings that you can attend. And I don't think anybody's going to, certainly won't laugh at you or anything if you ask questions. Like, we're here to answer your questions. So if the timing works for you, come to the SIG meetings, ask questions. Other than reaching out and asking for help, if the documentation doesn't exist, there's not really much else you can do.
Also, we have a public bug scrub every Monday and Thursday now. So we are going over the open issues and open PRs for SIG API machinery. I think this thing has worked well inside Google. When we onboard a new member in our API machinery team, we bring them to the bug scrub and get familiarized with all the concepts in API machinery. I think, yeah, you're welcome to join the bug scrub. That's also a good way to get exposure to the code.
Yeah, we need to get a blog post written about that stuff too, to get some more exposure to it. Because I think a lot of people would just enjoy watching how the method to the madness unfolds. The madness that is API machinery. All right, so let's see. Next question here. What are some common pitfalls that you see contributors making or encountering, rather?
So I know that it's been a concern for a while, and I'm not up to speed on the current state of it, but a lot of times people have trouble getting pull requests reviewed, and they open up a pull request in good faith and think, I'm so excited, I've got my pull request to Kubernetes, and then it just sits there. And maybe you try and figure out whatever SIG is responsible for for reviewing it, or it gets auto-assigned reviewers and you ping them and you don't get any response. So I would say that's a pitfall that's not a fault of a contributor by any means, but something that we're definitely trying to work on to make sure that PRs don't go unreviewed. But there's also processes for how to get new features into Kubernetes that have evolved over time. So back before Kubernetes was 1.0, you could just open up a pull request and the community was small enough that we would get it reviewed and it would eventually get merged. But now we have all the special interest groups and we have the Kubernetes enhancement process with KEPs. And so it's not okay anymore necessarily to just open up a giant pull request that had some new feature. So understanding the process is a potential pitfall if you're not aware of it as well.
Anybody else?
To add on Andy's point, I think if you're trying to make some very big new features, if you're a new contributor, it will be difficult to sell because maybe the SIG doesn't know you well. I think a better approach might be start with fixing like bugs and issues and get the special interest group to know you first. And after you accrue some credit, then you can add the new features like you can come to the community, the SIG meeting to propose your idea, get it socialized, and then follow the right process like writing a CAP, get the idea discussed, and do the implementation.
I think I mostly agree with Chow, but I also don't want to discourage people from taking like a meteor feature as their first item if that's what you wish to do. But if you wish to do that, I would encourage you, or I would say like the pitfall would be like what Andy said earlier, where you just submit a giant PR out of nowhere, and it's very likely that it won't really go anywhere. People won't review it. We don't know what's going on really. I encourage you, if you're doing your first feature or something, to really go through the SIG. So for example, if you're developing, if you see the need for a new storage feature and it's not currently being developed and you want to propose it, there's a process to do that. So like you could reach out to the SIG first, like SIG storage, ask about like, and kind of talk about it a little bit. And then you're going to need to like come up with a design, or I believe we use KEPs now, to kind of encompass that design process and really go through the whole process that we've built to get that feature in. And then by the time you submit your pull request, everyone knows what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how it will be useful to the community. And your pull request will have a much easier time getting merged.
Very elegant explanations. Thank you very much. That was good. We definitely need more education around KEPs, I think. So this is really good stuff, y'all. All right, I think we have room for one more. And hold on, let me get my DMs here. Well, in the meantime, are any of your SIGs looking for new or current contributors? Meaning like good first issue or help wanted, if you want to put it that way.
So I can at least give a readout on Cluster API. So we released our initial alpha API, V1 Alpha 1, at the end of March and beginning of April. And that was, I think, about 1.5 years in the making. But we recognize that there's some shortcomings. And so we're trying to refine the API, the overall flow of things. And so we have a few different work streams, if you will, that are trying to put together some proposals for changes to Cluster API. So they're not exactly good first issues, small bug fixes, but if you're interested in cluster management and you want to help direct and shape how the project goes, then I would encourage you to come to the weekly meetings on Wednesdays and to get involved in the various work streams that we have going on right now.
David or Chow?
Yeah, so we in SIG storage, sorry, I'm just trying to pull up the date that I need to reference in a second. Yeah, so we in SIG storage are always looking for new contributors. We have way too much work, not enough people working on it. And one unique thing about us, or I'm not actually sure if it's unique, but since moving to the container storage interface, the plugin mechanism for storage, our code and our issues are actually spread out across several different repositories now. So they're not actually all going to be in Kubernetes. So the best way to get involved with CSI and with SIG storage in general, I think, is to join our SIG. You can ask questions on the Slack channel. We have people monitoring that pretty much all the time. You ask how you can get involved, or we have our SIG meeting, I think every second Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, which you can join as well and always ask how you can help out, because the SIG is going to be your central location where we kind of have the pooled experience of, like, we know where all the issues are, and we've done an okay job of tagging things as like help wanted or good first issue, but although they're tagged, it's hard to find those issues in the first place. So the best place to go would be to start with our SIG Slack channel or a SIG meeting.
For the SIG API machinery, I don't know any open help wanted issue off the top of my head, but I want to promote the public bug scrub again. I think that would be a great way to get involved. You're welcome to join the meeting, and if there is some good candidate issue for new contributor, we can just give it to you during the bug scrub.
Awesome. Yes, and the bug scrub is super cool too. I did check that out. All right, last question. Here it is. They want to know how they can build the trust needed to be a maintainer if they don't work at the cloud or a major contributing company.
So I would say that to echo, I don't remember if it was David or Chow who said it, but come to the SIGs and participate in the SIGs, whatever you're interested in. So it doesn't matter who you work for. We don't really care about your company. I mean, it's interesting to see who works for different companies, but at the end of the day, if you are participating, if you're fixing bugs, if you are proposing features, implementing features, working on documentation, just in general participating, your presence and your actions will help you be recognized by whatever SIG you're working with as someone who has the ability to become a maintainer. And it takes time. So the only advice I can give is just keep at it and ask questions when you have them. And if you've got time to do PRs, bug fixes, features, that's amazing too.
Good advice.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody's in a +1 agreement there.
Yeah.
What he said. All right. Well, anybody have any questions for each other? If not, then that wraps the call. All right. That wraps May's edition of Meet Our Contributors. Thank you so much again to all three of you, including and plus George, for taking your time out today to help several people. One-on-one definitely does get time burdensome, so this is a great way to help people at scale. So thanks a ton. All right, and that wraps us up. We'll see everybody again June 1st, same time, same place. See you soon.
Thanks, Paris.
See
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Paris.